The billionaire CEO invited his ex to his private island. She arrived by helicopter with a court order and a camera crew. The helicopter blades sliced through the ocean air as it descended toward the pristine private island. Adrian Wolfe stood barefoot on the white sand, his tailored shirt billowing in the wind, a hopeful smile playing on his lips. This was his chance to win her back. "Sienna," he called out as the door opened, his voice carrying over the dying rotor noise. She emerged from the helicopter, sunglasses hiding her eyes, her posture calm and composed. For a moment his heart soared, then his world collapsed. A camera crew stepped out behind her. 3 people with professional equipment, lenses already pointed at his face. In Sienna's hand was not a weekend bag, but a document bearing the federal court seal. "What is this?" Adrian asked, his voice barely audible over the ocean breeze. Sienna removed her sunglasses, her gaze unwavering. "You invited me here to talk, so let's talk. But this time you don't get to control the rules anymore." She extended the document toward him. "This is a federal subpoena for your testimony regarding the buried safety reports at Wolfe Industries. The reports you hid while telling me you loved me." Adrian's face drained of color. "Sienna, please." "The cameras stay on, Adrian. The truth stays on. That's my only condition." His private paradise had just become a stage for his reckoning. And the woman he'd hoped would offer redemption had arrived to deliver justice instead. 2 years earlier, Sienna Valdez stood in the rain outside the gleaming Wolfe Industries headquarters, her camera protected under her jacket. The security guard eyed her press credentials suspiciously. The building rose like a glass monument to power and innovation, its founder's name emblazoned across the top in illuminated letters that pierced through the gray downpour. "Ms. Valdez?" A sleek assistant appeared at the door. "Mr. Wolfe will see you now." Sienna hadn't expected this. She'd been trying for weeks to get a comment from anyone at Wolfe Industries about their environmental practices for her documentary. Now suddenly the CEO himself was granting her an interview? She followed the assistant through a labyrinth of modern architecture. All clean lines, glass walls, and strategic lighting that made everyone look important. The elevator whisked them to the top floor silently, efficiently, like everything else in Adrian Wolfe's carefully constructed world. "He has 15 minutes for you," the assistant said as they approached a massive door. "He rarely gives interviews to independent filmmakers, so consider yourself fortunate." Sienna straightened her spine. "I consider myself persistent." The door opened to reveal a sprawling office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Rain streaked down the glass, creating a watery veil between the sanctuary of power and the world below. And there he was, Adrian Wolfe, younger in person than he appeared in business magazines, more intense, more present. He turned from the window, and Sienna felt the full force of his attention like a physical thing. "Ms. Valdez," he said, extending his hand. "I've watched your work. Your documentary on water rights in Arizona was uncomfortable for many of my colleagues." Sienna shook his hand firmly. "Truth often is." A smile flickered across his face, genuine, appreciative. 15 minutes, they told you? Let's make it 30. I'm curious about what you think you'll find here at Wolfe Industries." "The truth," she replied simply. "Bold assumption that I'm hiding something." "Everyone hides something, Mr. Wolfe, especially men with their names on buildings." He laughed then, a real laugh that transformed his face from corporate portrait to human being. "Please sit, and call me Adrian." That interview lasted 2 hours. Adrian canceled meetings, ignored calls, and focused entirely on Sienna's questions. He challenged her assumptions, defended his company's practices, and admitted to areas where they could improve. He was brilliant, articulate, and surprisingly candid. When she finally packed up her equipment, he walked her to the elevator. "Your reputation doesn't do you justice, Ms. Valdez," he said. "Sienna," she corrected. "Sienna," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt in his mouth. "You're more formidable than the articles suggest. And you're more forthcoming than your PR team probably advises." Another genuine smile. "Would you consider continuing this conversation over dinner?" There's more I'd like to discuss about your perspective on corporate responsibility. She should have said no. Professional boundaries existed for a reason. But something in the way he looked at her, not as a conquest or a threat, but as an equal mind, made her nod. Dinner. But I'm still working on this story. I wouldn't expect anything less. That dinner led to another, then another. Conversations about ethics, responsibility, power, and purpose stretched into the night. Adrian listened to her with an intensity few had ever shown her work. He disagreed without dismissing. He challenged without condescending. 3 weeks after their first meeting, he kissed her in the rain outside a small Italian restaurant where they'd been the last customers. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered against his lips. "Neither should I," he admitted. "But I've never met anyone like you." Their relationship intensified with the velocity of two strong currents colliding. Adrian flew her to project sites around the world, eager to show her the sustainable initiatives his company was implementing. Sienna introduced him to the communities affected by corporate decisions, humanizing statistics he'd previously viewed through spreadsheets. They were electric together, her passion for truth balancing his vision for progress. For 6 months, Sienna believed she'd found someone who valued her mind as much as her heart, who saw her work as essential rather than inconvenient. The first crack appeared subtly. Sienna was preparing to travel to a remote region for a story on resource extraction. Adrian frowned as she packed her equipment in his penthouse, where she'd been spending most nights. "That area had kidnappings last year," he said casually. "I've arranged for additional security to accompany you." Sienna paused. "I didn't ask for security. You didn't have to. I take care of what matters to me." She let it go that time, accepting the security detail as a gesture of concern. But similar moments accumulated. Adrian rescheduled her interviews to more convenient times. He upgraded her equipment without asking. He hired an assistant to help manage her growing profile. Each gesture came wrapped in care and concern. Each slightly eroded her independence. "I can handle my own schedule," she told him one evening after discovering he'd postponed an interview with a whistleblower. "The timing was bad," Adrian explained, his tone reasonable. "You were exhausted from your last trip. I was protecting your work by ensuring you'd be at your best. That's not your decision to make." He took her hands, his expression earnest. "Sienna, your work matters too much to risk with poor timing. I'm just offering resources most journalists would kill for." Put that way, her objections seemed ungrateful. The line between support and control blurred further. The final break came 9 months into their relationship. Sienna had been working on an investigation into labor practices at manufacturing plants that supplied components to several tech giants, including peripherally Wolfe Industries. The story wasn't about Adrian's company specifically, but it touched on industry-wide issues. She returned from a research trip to find Adrian in her apartment, reviewing her notes and footage on her laptop. "What are you doing?" she demanded, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. Adrian looked up, unashamed. "Protecting you from a potential legal nightmare. This story has serious deficiencies, Sienna. The sources aren't credible enough for the claims you're making. Those are confidential interviews. You had no right." "I had every right to prevent you from damaging your career with sloppy reporting," he interrupted, his voice still calm, reasonable. "I've already spoken with your producer. We agreed the story needs significant revisions before it can move forward." The blood drained from Sienna's face. "You spoke to my producer? Behind my back? For your own good? This story could generate serious blowback. Get out," she whispered. Adrian blinked, genuinely surprised by her reaction. "Sienna, be reasonable. I'm trying to help you. By violating my source's privacy? By going around me to my producer? By deciding what story I can tell?" Her voice rose with each question. "That's not help, Adrian. That's control." "You're overreacting," he said, standing to approach her. "Everything I do is because I care about you." She stepped back. "No. Everything you do is because you can't stand not controlling the outcome. My work, My sources, my stories, they're not yours to manage. Sienna, we're done, she said, her voice suddenly calm. Get out of my apartment. Get out of my life. You don't mean that, Adrian said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. I've never meant anything more clearly. I won't be another thing you own. He left, convinced she would calm down, that she would see his intervention as the protection it was intended to be. He sent flowers, left messages, appeared at her door. Sienna changed her number, moved apartments, and returned every gift. The story he had tried to suppress was published 3 months later, meticulously reported, airtight in its documentation, devastating in its impact. It won her first major award and established her as one of the most fearless documentary filmmakers of her generation. Adrian watched from a distance as her star rose. He told himself he was proud of her success, that he had only wanted to protect her from potential mistakes. But in quiet moments, he recognized the truth. He had tried to control her narrative because uncontrolled outcomes terrified him. For 2 years, they existed in separate orbits. Adrian expanded Wolfe Industries globally, his professional success masking his personal emptiness. Sienna's documentary work grew more influential, tackling powerful interests with unflinching integrity. Then came the scandal. Reports emerged that Wolfe Industries had buried internal safety assessments about one of their most profitable products. Whistleblowers claimed the company had known about potential risks for years, but had suppressed the information to avoid costly recalls and redesigns. Adrian denied the allegations publicly, assuring shareholders and customers that Wolfe Industries maintained the highest safety standards. Privately, he launched an internal investigation, determined to find the truth within his own company. What he discovered shook him to his core. The reports were real. They had been hidden from him by his own executive team, who had calculated that the statistical risk was acceptable compared to the cost of addressing the issues. But the timeline revealed something even more disturbing. The cover-up had begun during his relationship with Sienna. While he had been lecturing her about journalistic integrity, his own company had been burying evidence that could have prevented injuries. The revelation coincided with rumors that Sienna Valdez was working on a major investigation into safety practices across the tech industry. Adrian knew it was only a matter of time before she discovered what his team had hidden. In a moment of desperation or clarity, perhaps both, he sent her a private message. Sienna, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but before your story breaks, I'm asking for one conversation, not to change your mind, not to protect myself, but because you deserve to hear certain truths directly from me. My island this weekend, just you and me. After that, whatever you decide to do with what you know, I won't interfere. Adrian, he didn't expect her to accept. He certainly didn't expect what happened next. 3 days after sending his message, Sienna received an unmarked package at her production office. Inside was a dossier containing internal Wolfe Industries documents, safety reports, emails discussing their suppression, meeting minutes where executives calculated the cost of addressing the issues versus potential lawsuit settlements. The evidence was damning. And the timeline cut Sienna deeply. These decisions had been made while she was sharing Adrian's bed, while he was claiming to value truth above all else. Her producer urged immediate publication. This is the story of your career, Sienna. Wolfe is vulnerable right now, but something held her back. Not loyalty to Adrian, that had died the day he betrayed her trust. Not fear of his power, she had faced down bigger targets. What stopped her was the need to understand the full truth. Had Adrian known? Had he directed the cover-up? Or had he been insulated from these decisions by the same executive team that managed his carefully crafted image? She reread his invitation. One conversation. On his private island. His territory, his rules. Unless she changed the equation. Sienna made 3 calls. One to her most trusted camera crew. One to a federal prosecutor who had been building a case against several tech companies for similar violations. One to a helicopter charter service. Then she replied to Adrian's message with a single word, tomorrow. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine beach as Adrian paced barefoot on the sand. His private island in the Caribbean had always been his sanctuary, the one place where he could escape the pressures of being Adrian Wolfe, CEO and public figure. Today, it felt like the last place he could make things right. When the helicopter appeared on the horizon, his heart rate accelerated. He had rehearsed what to say, how to explain, how to apologize without excusing. But all his prepared words evaporated when the aircraft landed and Sienna emerged, followed by a camera crew and carrying a federal subpoena. "You invited me here to talk," she said, her voice carrying over the dying rotor noise. "So let's talk. But this time you don't get to control the rules anymore." Adrian stared at the cameras, then back at Sienna. "This wasn't what I meant by a conversation. And accessing my private notes wasn't what I meant by a relationship," she countered. "We all have disappointments." She handed him the subpoena. "This compels your testimony regarding the safety reports your company buried. You have a choice, Adrian. You can fight this legally and publicly, or you can start talking now, to me on camera with the full truth." "You're filming this as what, revenge?" he asked, genuine hurt in his voice. "As documentation," Sienna corrected. "Something your company seems to struggle with." Adrian looked past her to the waiting helicopter pilot. "And if I refuse? If I ask all of you to leave my private property?" "Then we leave," she said simply. "And tomorrow the federal case proceeds without your input. My documentary airs without your perspective. And whatever truth you wanted to tell me dies here on this beach." He studied her face, the same determined expression he had fallen in love with, now turned against him. "You really hate me that much?" "I don't hate you at all," Sienna replied, and for the first time, emotion cracked through her professional veneer. "That would be easier. I loved the man you pretended to be. I'm here to meet the man you really are." The words hit him like physical blows. Adrian looked from the cameras to the subpoena to Sienna's unwavering gaze. Finally, he nodded. "The main house has better lighting for your interview," he said quietly. "This way." The camera crew exchanged glances of surprise. They had expected resistance, legal threats, perhaps even an immediate departure. Instead, Adrian Wolfe, one of the most powerful men in the tech industry, was leading them into his private home to document his own potential downfall. Inside the sprawling beachfront villa, Adrian directed them to a sunlit room with panoramic ocean views. While the crew set up their equipment, he and Sienna stood in uncomfortable silence. "Did you know?" she finally asked, her voice low enough that the crew couldn't hear. "About the reports. Did you know when we were together?" Adrian met her eyes. "That's the first question I want to answer on camera. You deserve the truth with witnesses, not private assurances." Sienna nodded, a flicker of respect crossing her face despite everything. When the cameras were rolling, Adrian sat across from Sienna, his usual corporate polish absent. He had changed from his casual beach attire into a simple button-down shirt. Not quite the power suits he wore for public appearances, but formal enough to show respect for the seriousness of the moment. "Let's start with the fundamental question," Sienna began. "The internal safety reports about defects in the W7 processor. When did you become aware they existed?" Adrian took a deep breath. 6 weeks ago, when the whistleblower allegations first emerged. You expect people to believe that the CEO was unaware of critical safety issues with his company's flagship product? "I don't expect anything," Adrian replied. "I can only tell you what happened. My executive team, specifically, Chief Operating Officer Marcus Vega and Chief Legal Officer Diana Winters, made a calculated decision to keep those reports from reaching me." "Why would they do that?" "Because they knew what my response would be. I would have ordered an immediate recall, a redesign, and public disclosure. That would have cost the company billions and potentially our market position. So they protected the company's interests," Sienna pressed. "They thought they were," Adrian acknowledged. "They made a statistical calculation about acceptable risk versus financial impact. People were injured because of that calculation." Adrian's face tightened with genuine pain. Yes, 17 confirmed cases of overheating causing burns. 2 house fires. No fatalities, thank God. But that's not the point. 1 injury would have been too many if it could have been prevented. Sienna leaned forward slightly. When we were together, you spoke passionately about corporate responsibility. You criticized other tech companies for prioritizing profits over safety. Was that all performance? Adrian flinched at the question. No, those were my genuine beliefs. Still are. Yet your company operated in direct contradiction to those stated values. Yes, Adrian admitted, his voice strained. The disconnect between what I believed we stood for and what was actually happening beneath the surface. It's the greatest failure of my leadership. The camera captured every micro-expression. The tightening around his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clasped and unclasped as he spoke. Let's go back, Sienna said. These safety issues were first documented 3 years ago, according to the reports I've seen. That's during the period when you and I were involved. You were telling me about transparency while your company was actively burying evidence. How do you reconcile that? Adrian's gaze dropped momentarily before meeting hers again. I can't reconcile it. That's the point. I was living a contradiction I wasn't even aware of. That seems convenient. It's not convenient. It's humiliating, Adrian replied, a flash of genuine anger breaking through. Do you think I want to admit that I failed this fundamentally? That people I trusted made decisions that violated everything I claimed to stand for? That I created a culture where they believed this was acceptable? His raw emotion caught Sienna off guard. This wasn't the controlled, measured Adrian Wolfe the public knew. This was something she had glimpsed only in their most private moments, Adrian stripped of his careful composure. Why should anyone believe you didn't know? She pressed, recovering her professional distance. They shouldn't, based solely on my word, he acknowledged. But the internal communication records will show I was never included on discussions about these issues. The executive team used a separate communication channel specifically to keep certain decisions from reaching me. And you've turned over these records? To the federal investigators, yes. Everything we've found in the internal investigation. Sienna consulted her notes. Your company issued a statement last week denying any knowledge of safety issues prior to the whistleblower report. Yes, I authorized that statement based on what I knew at the time, Adrian admitted. 3 days later, our internal investigation uncovered the truth. I should have immediately retracted the statement. I didn't. I was trying to understand the full scope of the situation before speaking publicly. Or you were buying time to construct a defense. Adrian didn't flinch from the accusation. That's a fair interpretation. I was in shock, trying to grasp how this could have happened under my watch. But the delay in correcting the record was wrong, regardless of my reasons. The interview continued for hours, with breaks only for equipment adjustments and basic necessities. Adrian answered every question, no matter how pointed or personal. The camera crew exchanged impressed glances as the powerful CEO submitted to Sienna's relentless examination without legal counsel present. As afternoon faded toward evening, Sienna shifted to more personal territory. You interfered with my work when we were together. You accessed my notes without permission and contacted my producer behind my back. Was that connected to concerns about what I might discover about Wolfe Industries? Adrian shook his head firmly. No, that was about control, pure and simple. My need to manage outcomes to protect you in ways you never asked for or wanted. It was wrong, inexcusable, and it cost me the most important relationship of my life. You're characterizing it as protection. I experienced it as a violation of trust. It was a violation, Adrian agreed without hesitation. I dressed it up as protection to justify it to myself, but that doesn't change what it was. Sienna studied him for a long moment. Why did you really invite me here, Adrian? The question hung between them, heavier than all the technical and legal inquiries that had preceded it. Because I owed you the truth directly, not through press releases or legal statements, he said finally. And because I needed to face the person I'd failed most completely, both personally and as a business leader whose actions didn't match his stated values. Not to win me back? Sienna pressed. A sad smile touched Adrian's lips. I'm not delusional, Sienna. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, stays broken. As the light faded outside, Sienna called for a break. The camera crew packed up their equipment for the day, heading to the guest quarters Adrian had offered them. Left alone in the main house, Adrian and Sienna maintained a careful distance from each other. The professional structure of the interview had provided a framework for their interaction. Without it, the weight of their shared history hung in the air between them. Are you hungry? Adrian asked finally, breaking the awkward silence. Starving, actually, Sienna admitted. I can have the chef prepare something, or let's cook, Sienna interrupted. Like we used to. The suggestion surprised him. You're sure? It's just dinner, Adrian, not forgiveness. In the spacious kitchen, they fell into a rhythm that felt hauntingly familiar. Adrian chopping vegetables while Sienna prepared a sauce, moving around each other with the unconscious choreography of people who had once shared a life. Do you remember the first meal we cooked together? Sienna asked as she stirred the pasta. Adrian smiled at the memory. That disaster of a risotto in your tiny apartment. The smoke alarm went off. And you were so flustered. The great Adrian Wolfe, defeated by rice. You laughed at me, he recalled. Not many people would dare. I was never intimidated by you, Sienna said. That's why it worked, for a while. Until I ruined it. Sienna didn't contradict him. They ate at the kitchen island rather than the formal dining room, another echo of their past together. Tomorrow I want to interview your staff here on the island, Sienna said as they finished eating. And I need access to your communications with your executive team from the period when the reports were first suppressed. Adrian nodded. Whatever you need. No restrictions. Why are you being so cooperative? Sienna asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Your lawyers must be having collective heart attacks right now. Probably, Adrian agreed. But I'm tired of the careful image, the strategic responses, the managed narrative. That approach created the culture that allowed this to happen. So this is what, a personal redemption tour? No, Adrian said firmly. Redemption would imply I deserve forgiveness. I don't. This is accountability. Long overdue. Sienna studied him across the kitchen island. The Adrian I knew would never have surrendered control like this. The Adrian you knew was terrified of vulnerability, he replied quietly. Losing you, then discovering how profoundly I'd failed as a leader. It forces a certain reckoning. Don't make this about us, Sienna warned. What happened between us was personal. What your company did affected people's safety. They're not the same. They come from the same root, Adrian countered. My inability to trust processes I couldn't control. My need to manage outcomes rather than respond honestly to reality. Sienna didn't argue the point. I should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day. Adrian nodded. The East Wing is prepared for you. Complete privacy, separate from where the crew is staying. Thank you, she said formally, the brief moment of personal connection already receding. As she turned to leave, Adrian spoke again. Sienna, regardless of what happens with the documentary or the federal case, I am sorry. For all of it. She paused without turning back. I believe you are. I'm just not sure it matters. The next morning dawned clear and brilliant over the Caribbean. Sienna found Adrian already awake, reviewing documents on the terrace. Your team has been calling non-stop, he said without looking up. 17 missed calls from your COO. 32 from legal. They've probably tracked the helicopter here by now. And, Sienna asked, pouring herself coffee from the carafe on the table. And I've instructed island security to deny access to anyone, including my own people. This process happens on your terms, not theirs. The camera crew appeared, equipment ready. The day's filming began with interviews of the island staff, people who had worked for Adrian for years, and witnessed his private moments away from the corporate spotlight. To Sienna's surprise, Adrian made himself scarce during these interviews, ensuring his presence wouldn't influence their responses. His longtime housekeeper spoke of his obsessive work habits, his occasional kindness, and his intense privacy. His security chief described the increasing isolation of the past 2 years. His personal chef mentioned how Adrian had stopped entertaining, stopped celebrating, stopped doing anything but working since the breakup. He was different when you were together, the chef told Sienna, unaware of the personal impact of his words. More human, somehow. By midday, Sienna had compiled a complex portrait of Adrian Wolfe, not the corporate villain she had half expected to confirm, nor the misunderstood hero he might have hoped to present. Instead, a flawed, complicated man whose greatest failures stemmed from the same traits that had driven his success: control, perfectionism, and fear of vulnerability. When she finally returned to interviewing Adrian directly, her approach had subtly shifted. "Tell me about your childhood," she began, surprising him with the personal direction. Adrian hesitated, then spoke of growing up with a father whose love was entirely conditional on achievement, of a mother who taught him that image was everything, of learning early that control was the only protection against pain. "I built Wolfe Industries from nothing because I needed to prove my worth," he admitted. "Every success raised the stakes. Every achievement created more to lose. And that justified controlling everything and everyone around you?" Sienna pressed. "It explained it. It doesn't justify it," Adrian corrected. "When you create something from nothing, when thousands of jobs depend on your decisions, when one mistake could destroy everything, the weight of that responsibility can distort your perspective. Many leaders carry similar responsibilities without resorting to manipulation." Adrian nodded. "You're right. The pressure didn't make these choices inevitable. I made them. The company culture reflects my values, including the ones I wouldn't admit to myself." As the interview progressed, Sienna's producer called with breaking news. Another executive at Wolfe Industries had come forward, providing evidence that COO Marcus Vega had orchestrated the cover-up more extensively than initially understood. "This changes things," the producer said. "Vega appears to have been running a shadow operation within the company, hiding information not just from the public, but from other executives, including Wolfe himself." Sienna relayed this information to Adrian, watching his reaction carefully. "Does this surprise you?" she asked. "That Marcus would go to such lengths?" "No," Adrian admitted. "He's brilliant but ruthless. What surprises me is that I created an environment where he believed this was what I wanted. Results at any cost. Problems handled quietly, messiness contained. Even if you didn't know specifically about these safety issues, the culture that allowed their suppression was your creation," Sienna summarized. "Yes," Adrian agreed without hesitation. "That's the hardest truth I've had to face. I can't claim innocence just because I was deliberately kept in the dark about specific decisions. I built the system that rewarded this behavior." As the sun began to set on their second day of filming, Sienna's producer called again with another development. Marcus Vega had issued a statement claiming Adrian had been fully informed about the safety concerns and had personally directed their suppression. "He's throwing you under the bus," Sienna told Adrian after ending the call. Adrian absorbed this with surprising calm. "I expected as much. It's what I would have done in his position." "You don't seem worried." "The documentation will show the truth," Adrian replied. "Either way, I'm responsible either through direct knowledge or through negligence. The difference matters legally but not morally." Sienna studied him with growing confusion. This wasn't the Adrian Wolfe she had known, the man obsessed with controlling narratives, managing perceptions, and protecting his carefully constructed image. "What changed you?" she asked suddenly, the question emerging before she could frame it professionally. Adrian looked at her directly, the cameras momentarily forgotten. "Losing you. Not immediately. At first, I just felt angry, misunderstood. But over time, I started seeing our relationship through your eyes. How my protection must have felt like control. How my help undermined your agency." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Then when this scandal broke, When I discovered what had happened under my watch, the parallel became impossible to ignore. I had done to you exactly what my executive team did to me, made decisions, for your own good, without your consent, controlled information to manage outcomes, violated trust in the name of protection. The raw honesty of his response left Sienna momentarily speechless. The camera crew exchanged glances, aware they were capturing something beyond the scope of their original assignment. "We should break for the day," Sienna said finally, her professional mask slipping slightly. That evening, as the crew reviewed footage in their quarters, Sienna walked alone on the beach, trying to reconcile the Adrian she had loved, the Adrian who had betrayed her trust, and the Adrian who now submitted himself to her questioning with such unflinching honesty. She didn't hear him approach until his voice came softly from behind her. "This was always your favorite time on the island," Adrian said, keeping a respectful distance. "The blue hour, you called it." Sienna didn't turn. "I'm not here to reminisce, Adrian. I know." He moved to stand beside her, both of them facing the darkening ocean. I need you to know something off camera. Something I have no right to say but need to anyway." She waited silently. "I loved you," he said simply. "Not as a possession. Not as an extension of my image. I loved your mind, your integrity, your fearlessness. And I destroyed it because I couldn't bear the thought of not being able to protect you from every possible hurt. Including yourself, apparently," Sienna replied, her voice tight with emotion she'd been suppressing. "Especially myself," Adrian acknowledged. "I think on some level I knew I would hurt you eventually. My need for control was always going to collide with your independence." Sienna finally turned to face him. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because tomorrow you'll finish your interviews. You'll take your footage and create a documentary that will likely contribute to the end of my career. And the truth deserves to be told. But before that happens, I needed you to know that losing you was the beginning of whatever small wisdom I might have gained since." "You think that matters to me now?" Sienna asked, but the edge in her voice had softened slightly. "No," Adrian said. "I don't expect it to change anything. I don't want to win you back, Sienna. I want to deserve you one day. Those are very different things." The distinction struck her with unexpected force. The Adrian she had known would have launched a campaign to reclaim her, would have deployed his considerable resources to manage the situation, would have tried to control the outcome. This Adrian simply stood before her, offering truth without expectation. "I should go inside," she said finally. Adrian nodded, making no move to follow. "Good night, Sienna." She walked several steps before pausing. Without turning back, she asked, "Did you ever consider that true protection might have meant supporting my independence rather than undermining it?" "Too late," Adrian admitted. "Much too late." The third day of filming began with a dramatic development. Overnight, federal agents had raided Wolfe Industries' headquarters, seizing documents and electronic records. Marcus Vega had been taken in for questioning. The company's stock was in freefall. Adrian received the news calmly, offering Sienna full access to his communications with his crisis team. "Aren't you going to return to handle this?" she asked, genuinely puzzled by his continued cooperation with her documentary while his company imploded. "The board has temporarily removed me as CEO pending investigation," Adrian explained. "As they should. My focus now is on ensuring the truth comes out fully, not on saving my position." The day's interviews delved deeper into the technical aspects of the safety issues and the corporate structure that had allowed their suppression. Adrian provided detailed explanations of how decisions flowed through the company, identifying the systemic failures that had enabled the cover-up. By late afternoon, Sienna's producer called with news that would dramatically alter the narrative. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence largely exonerating Adrian of direct knowledge while implicating Marcus Vega and several other executives in a coordinated deception. "They deliberately kept him out of the loop," the producer explained. "Cray had fake reports for his review while acting on the real data internally. It's actually quite sophisticated." Sienna shared this information with Adrian, watching his reaction carefully. "Does this change how you feel about your responsibility?" she asked. It changes the legal dimension, Adrian acknowledged. But not the moral one. I created a culture where this deception was possible, where people believed results mattered more than methods. As the final interviews concluded, Sienna faced a documentary filmmaker's classic dilemma. The story she had come to tell was not the story she had found. She had arrived expecting to document the downfall of a corporate villain who had knowingly endangered consumers. Instead, she had captured the complex reckoning of a flawed leader confronting the consequences of his leadership philosophy. "We have enough for 3 different films," her cinematographer commented as they packed up their equipment. "Corporate exposé, personal redemption story, systemic analysis of how power corrupts. Which direction are you thinking?" Sienna didn't answer immediately. The truth was more nuanced than any single narrative could capture, and her own feelings about Adrian had become impossibly tangled with her professional judgment. That evening, as the crew prepared the helicopter for their departure the next morning, Adrian found Sienna on the terrace, reviewing footage on her laptop. "Is it what you expected?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. "No," she admitted. "I came here looking for a straightforward villain. And instead I found a human being," Sienna said, closing her laptop. "Flawed, complicated, trying to be better than his worst instincts." Adrian leaned against the railing, looking out at the darkening ocean. "What happens now?" "I finished the documentary. The federal investigation continues. Your board decides your fate." She paused. "Life goes on. And us?" The question was quiet, tentative. Sienna shook her head. "There is no us, Adrian. There can't be." "I know," he said quickly. "I didn't mean, I just meant, where do we stand with each other?" It was a fair question. The intensity of the past 3 days had created an intimacy neither had anticipated, not romantic, but something equally powerful. The intimacy of truth-telling without filters. "I don't hate you," Sienna offered finally. "I thought I did or should, but I don't." Adrian nodded, accepting this small mercy. "For what it's worth, these have been the most honest days of my life. Painful but clarifying." "For me too," Sienna admitted. They stood in silence as stars began appearing above the ocean. Not the comfortable silence of lovers, but not the tense silence of adversaries either. Something in between, the quiet of 2 people who had seen each other's truths and survived the revelation. "Walk with me," Adrian asked suddenly. "One last time before you leave. Just down to the beach and back." Sienna hesitated, then nodded. They made their way down the stone steps to the shoreline, maintaining a careful distance between them. "I've been thinking about what you asked yesterday," Adrian said as they walked. "About whether true protection might have meant supporting your independence rather than undermining it. And you were right. I confused control with care. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself from the possibility of losing you." He smiled ruefully. "Which I did anyway because of that very fear." "It's a common mistake," Sienna offered, surprising herself with the generosity. "Confusing love with possession. One I won't make again," Adrian said. "With anyone." They reached the end of the beach and turned back toward the house, its lights glowing warmly against the night sky. "What will you do?" Sienna asked. "After all this settles." Adrian considered the question seriously. "Rebuild if I'm allowed to. Not just the company, myself. Create the culture I claim to believe in rather than the one my actions actually fostered. And if the board removes you permanently, then I start something new," he said simply. "Something built on transparency from the ground up." Sienna nodded, believing him despite herself. The Adrian she had known would have fought ruthlessly to maintain his position, his power, his control. This Adrian seemed prepared to lose everything if that was the cost of integrity. As they approached the house, Adrian stopped. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For coming here. For asking the hard questions. For not letting me hide behind PR statements and legal maneuvers." "I was just doing my job," Sienna replied. But they both knew it was more than that. Your documentary will likely end my career as I've known it, Adrian continued. And it should. The truth matters more than my reputation. The statement hung between them, simple, profound, and completely at odds with the man who had once interfered with her work to control the narrative. "Good night, Adrian," Sienna said, unable to find adequate words for the complexity of the moment. "Good night, Sienna." She turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're finally becoming the man you always claimed to be." The next morning, as the helicopter prepared for departure, Adrian stood on the beach to see them off. No final pleas, no attempts to influence the documentary's content, no last-minute revelations designed to sway Sienna's perspective. Just a man facing the consequences of his choices with a dignity she hadn't expected. As Sienna boarded the helicopter, Adrian handed her a sealed envelope. "Not for the documentary," he said. "Just for you. Read it when you're ready." The envelope remained unopened in her bag as they lifted off, the island growing smaller beneath them until it was just a speck in the vast blue ocean. 3 months later, Sienna's documentary, The Control Paradox, premiered at a major film festival. Rather than a simple exposé of corporate malfeasance, it explored the complex psychology of power and the systems that enable ethical failures even among well-intentioned leaders. Adrian Wolfe featured prominently not as a villain or a hero, but as a case study in how the very traits that drive success can also enable failure. His unflinching honesty during the island interviews became the documentary's emotional core. The film ended with a postscript. Adrian had resigned as CEO of Wolfe Industries, accepting full responsibility for the culture that had enabled the safety cover-up. Marcus Vega and 2 other executives faced criminal charges. Adrian had established a victims' compensation fund with his personal fortune, ensuring those harmed by the product defects received support regardless of legal outcomes. The night of the premiere, as audiences and critics praised the documentary's nuance and ethical complexity, Sienna finally opened the envelope Adrian had given her 3 months earlier. Inside was not a letter, but a simple document, Adrian's resignation letter to the Wolfe Industries board. It had been written the night before Sienna arrived on the island with her camera crew, before the interviews, before the federal subpoena, before any public pressure had forced his hand. The letter acknowledged his failure of leadership, accepted full responsibility for the company culture, and offered his resignation effective immediately. It was dated 3 days before their confrontation on the beach. He had already decided to step down before she arrived. The interviews, the confessions, the raw honesty, none of it had been damage control or public relations strategy. He had already chosen accountability before the cameras started rolling. Attached was a brief note in Adrian's handwriting. "Sienna, I didn't show you this during filming because I didn't want it to influence your documentary. The truth mattered more than my redemption narrative. I'm sharing it now not to change your mind about me, but because you deserve to know that your arrival didn't force my hand. It gave me the courage to follow through on what I already knew was right. Thank you for that gift, Adrian." Sienna sat alone in her hotel room, the note in her hands, confronting a possibility she had refused to consider. That people, even those who have hurt us deeply, can change in fundamental ways. 2 weeks later, as the documentary gained momentum and sparked national conversations about corporate ethics, Sienna received a message from Adrian. Not a personal appeal, but a professional one. He was establishing a corporate accountability initiative, funding independent oversight of tech company safety practices, and wanted her input on its structure. "No strings," his message concluded. "Your expertise would simply make it better. If you're not interested, I completely understand." Sienna considered ignoring it. Moving on completely would be the cleaner choice. But the filmmaker in her, the truth seeker, couldn't deny the potential impact of such an initiative if structured properly. She replied with professional detachment, offering to review the proposal and provide feedback. Nothing more. Their subsequent communications remained strictly focused on the initiative. No personal references, no attempts to revisit the past, no subtle efforts to rebuild what had been broken. Just 2 professionals with complementary expertise working toward a shared goal. 6 months after the island confrontation, They met in person for the first time since the documentary filming. A neutral location, a conference room at a university hosting a symposium on corporate ethics where both were speaking. "You look well," Adrian said simply as they shook hands. "So do you," Sienna replied, noting the changes in him. He seemed less polished, more authentic, his designer suits replaced by more casual attire. His corporate mask softened into something more human. Their meeting was brief, focused entirely on the accountability initiative. As they concluded, Adrian handed her a folder with the latest proposal revisions. "Your documentary has changed things," he said. "Companies are implementing new oversight mechanisms. Boards are asking tougher questions. It's making a difference." "That was the goal," Sienna replied. Adrian nodded. "I should let you get to your panel." As he turned to leave, Sienna found herself speaking. "Adrian," he paused, turning back. "I read your resignation letter," she said. "The one you wrote before I arrived on the island." Something vulnerable flickered across his face. "I wondered if you had. Why didn't you tell me during filming? It would have changed the narrative in your favor." "Because you deserve to find the truth your way," he said simply. "Not the version I wanted you to see." The answer struck her with its fundamental difference from the Adrian she had known, the man who had once tried to control her reporting to protect his preferred narrative. "Would you like to get coffee?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself as much as him. To discuss the initiative further. Adrian studied her carefully, understanding the significance of the small opening. "I'd like that," he said. "Very much." They found a quiet cafe near the university, their conversation gradually expanding beyond the accountability initiative to their current projects, the industry response to the documentary, the changes in their respective lives. "I'm not running anything now," Adrian told her. "For the first time since college. It's disorienting, but clarifying." "What's next for you?" Sienna asked. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "I'm trying to listen more than direct, to understand more than control." "That doesn't sound like the Adrian Wolfe I knew." "I'm not him anymore," Adrian said simply. "Or trying not to be." As they parted ways outside the cafe, Adrian made no attempt to suggest another meeting, no effort to push for more than she had offered. "Thank you for the coffee," he said, "and for your input on the initiative." "You're welcome," Sienna replied. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "I'm in town until Friday, if you want to continue the discussion." A careful smile touched his lips. "I'd like that. Just let me know when it works for you." They met twice more that week. Professional discussions that occasionally veered into personal territory before returning to safer ground. With each conversation, Sienna found herself confronting an uncomfortable truth. She was beginning to like this new version of Adrian. Not with the passionate intensity of their former relationship, but with a cautious respect for the person he was becoming. On her last evening in town, as they walked from a restaurant back to her hotel, Adrian finally broached the subject they had been carefully avoiding. "I know there's no going back," he said quietly. "Too much has happened, but I've missed your friendship, your perspective, your challenge to my thinking." Sienna considered his words carefully. "Friendship requires trust." "I know," Adrian acknowledged, "and I haven't earned that yet." "Yet," Sienna repeated, noting his choice of word. "You believe you could?" "I hope so," he said simply. "Not through grand gestures or promises, but through consistent actions over time. If you're willing to allow that possibility." They had reached her hotel. Sienna turned to face him directly. "I'm not ready to trust you again," she said honestly. "But I'm open to the possibility that might change. Small steps. Professional collaboration first. See where it leads." The hope that flickered across Adrian's face was quickly tempered with respect for her boundaries. "Small steps," he agreed. "At your pace, not mine." "Good night, Adrian." "Good night, Sienna." In the months that followed, their professional collaboration on the accountability initiative gradually expanded. Weekly video calls, occasional in-person meetings when their schedules aligned. a careful rebuilding of connection based on shared values rather than romantic history. Adrian never pushed for more than Sienna offered, never attempted to accelerate their careful rapprochement, never tried to manage the outcome. A year after the island confrontation, Sienna's documentary won a prestigious award. Adrian sent a simple congratulatory message, making no attempt to insert himself into her moment of professional triumph. 2 days later, Sienna called him, the first time she had initiated personal rather than professional contact. "I'm working on a new project," she said after they had exchanged greetings, "about redemption and accountability in public life. I'd like to interview you again, if you're willing." "Of course," Adrian replied. "Whatever you need. This time without the federal subpoena," Sienna added, a hint of humor in her voice. "Appreciated, though I deserved it the first time." Their conversation continued, easier than it had been in months. When they finally said goodbye, Sienna found herself smiling at her phone, a small but significant shift in her emotional landscape. The new documentary project brought them together more frequently. Professional boundaries remained firmly in place, but within those boundaries, a genuine connection re-emerged, not the passionate romance of before, but something potentially more durable. Mutual respect, shared purpose, honest communication. 18 months after the island confrontation, Adrian's accountability initiative had grown into a respected independent oversight organization. Sienna's new documentary was nearing completion. Their professional collaboration had proven successful beyond either's expectations. After a particularly productive meeting with potential funders, they walked through a park near Sienna's production office, discussing next steps. "I never thanked you properly," Adrian said suddenly. "For what?" "For arriving on my island with a camera crew and a federal subpoena," he replied with a small smile. "Best thing that ever happened to me, professionally and personally." Sienna laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that had once been common between them. "Not many people would see it that way." "I'm learning to value truth over comfort," Adrian said. "Something you always understood." They reached a bench overlooking a small pond. By unspoken agreement, they sat, watching ducks glide across the water's surface. "Do you ever think about us?" Sienna asked, the question emerging before she could reconsider it. "What we were before?" Adrian turned to her, his expression serious. "Yes, but not with nostalgia or regret. With clarity. We weren't healthy. I wasn't healthy. And now I understand that love without respect isn't love at all. That protection without trust is just control. That real connection requires allowing the other person complete freedom to stay or go." Sienna studied him, seeing the genuine change that time and hard lessons had wrought. "You really have changed." "I'm trying," Adrian said simply. Every day, they sat in comfortable silence, the afternoon sun warming their faces. Not lovers, not yet even friends in the fullest sense. But something new was growing between them, something built on stronger foundations than their first connection had been. "I should get back to the office," Sienna said finally. Adrian nodded, making no attempt to prolong the moment. As they stood to leave, Sienna made a decision. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" she asked. "Not to discuss the initiative or the documentary. Just dinner." The careful hope in Adrian's eyes was tempered with patient understanding. "I'd like that very much. Whenever you're ready." "Friday," Sienna suggested. "I know a small Italian place that reminds me of where we used to go." "Friday would be perfect," Adrian replied, his voice carefully neutral despite the significance of the invitation. As they parted ways at the park entrance, no promises were made, no expectations set. Just a dinner invitation, a small step toward whatever might be possible between two people who had seen the worst in each other and were now, cautiously, discovering the best. The documentary Sienna eventually completed wasn't just about Adrian's story, but about the larger questions his journey illuminated. Can people fundamentally change? Is redemption possible after serious ethical failures? How do we balance accountability with the possibility of growth? The film ended with a scene that captured the complexity of these questions. Adrian and Sienna walking along a beach at sunset, maintaining a respectful distance, engaged in earnest conversation. Not a romantic reconciliation, but something equally powerful, two people who had traveled through betrayal and reckoning to arrive at a place of authentic connection. The final shot pulled back to reveal they were not on Adrian's private island, but on a public beach, no longer in an isolated world of privilege, but grounded in the shared reality where true growth happens. As the screen faded to black, Sienna's voiceover delivered the documentary's final thought. Perhaps the most difficult truth to accept is that people can change in fundamental ways. Not through dramatic gestures or public declarations, but through the quiet, consistent work of becoming better than their worst mistakes. The question isn't whether redemption is possible, but whether we're willing to witness it without cynicism, to allow others the grace of growth we hope for ourselves. The credits rolled over this final thought, leaving audiences with a meditation on forgiveness, accountability, and the messy, non-linear path of human transformation. 2 years after the island confrontation, Sienna's second documentary premiered to critical acclaim. Adrian attended the opening night, sitting quietly in the back of the theater, making no attempt to claim association with the filmmaker whose career had soared partly through documenting his failures. At the reception afterward, they maintained a respectful professional distance. Sienna accepting congratulations from industry peers, Adrian engaging in thoughtful conversations about the film's themes with other attendees. Only the occasional glance between them hinted at a connection deeper than filmmaker and subject. As the event wound down, Adrian prepared to leave, not wanting to intrude on Sienna's professional triumph. She caught him at the door. "You're sneaking out," she observed. "Not sneaking," he corrected gently. "Just giving you your space. It's your night." "Walk with me?" she asked. "I could use some air." They slipped out together, finding a quiet path along the riverfront near the venue. The night was cool, stars visible despite the city lights. "What did you think?" Sienna asked. "Of the film?" "It was brilliant," Adrian replied honestly. "Uncomfortable in all the right ways. It made me examine my own capacity for self-deception all over again. That wasn't my intention. I know. That's what makes it powerful." He paused. "You were fair to me. More than fair." "I tried to be truthful," Sienna said. "That's different from fair." Adrian nodded, understanding the distinction. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the river flowing steadily beside them. "I've been thinking about your final narration," Adrian said finally. "About change and witnessing it without cynicism. And I wonder if you believe that. About me." He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Not as a filmmaker analyzing a subject, but as a person who was hurt by my actions." It was the most direct reference to their personal history he had made in months. Sienna considered her answer carefully. "I believe you've changed," she said finally. "I've seen it in your actions, not just your words. The accountability initiative, the victims fund, the way you've rebuilt your life around transparency rather than control." "But," Adrian prompted, sensing her hesitation. "But trust is still difficult," Sienna admitted. "Not because I don't believe in your change, but because memory has its own power." Adrian nodded, accepting this truth without defensiveness. "I understand. Some bridges, once broken, can never be fully restored. They can only be rebuilt differently." "Yes," Sienna agreed. "Differently." They resumed walking, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Her next project, his recent work with ethics education, mutual acquaintances in their overlapping professional worlds. As they approached the point where they would need to part ways, Adrian spoke again. "Thank you for allowing me to be part of tonight, and for the past 2 years of whatever this has been between us." "What would you call it?" Sienna asked, curious about his perspective. Adrian considered the question. "A second chance, but not a repetition. A new path entirely." The answer resonated with her own feelings. The recognition that whatever was growing between them wasn't a restoration of what had been, but something entirely new, built on different foundations. I'm flying to London tomorrow for the European premiere, Sienna said. But when I get back, maybe we could have dinner at my place this time. The invitation represented a small but significant shift, from public meetings to private space, from professional collaboration to personal connection. I'd like that, Adrian said simply, making no attempt to overstate the moment's significance. As they said goodnight, there was no dramatic gesture, no attempt to reclaim what had once been between them, just a quiet acknowledgement of possibility, of a future neither could have imagined during their confrontation on that island beach 2 years earlier. 3 weeks later, Sienna cooked dinner in her apartment for the first time since their relationship had ended. Not the same apartment. She had moved to a light-filled loft in a different neighborhood, a space that held no memories of their past. Adrian arrived precisely on time, bearing wine and flowers but no presumptions. He had changed physically as well as emotionally over the past 2 years. His formerly perfect corporate appearance softened into something more authentic, the carefully maintained facade replaced by genuine presence. Your documentary is changing conversations, he told her as they prepared the meal together. I've been invited to speak at 3 universities about ethical leadership and accountability. Are you going to accept? Sienna asked, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. I think so. Not as an expert, but as a case study in failure and learning. She glanced at him, noting the humility that had replaced his former certainty. You're too hard on yourself sometimes. Better that than not hard enough, Adrian replied. Complacency was my downfall once. I don't want to repeat it. They ate at her small dining table, the conversation flowing easily between professional topics and more personal reflections. No mention of rekindling romance, no pressure for definitions or commitments. Just 2 people enjoying each other's company in the present moment. After dinner, they moved to her living room balcony, watching the city lights while sharing a bottle of wine. I never asked you, Sienna said suddenly. What happened to the island? Adrian smiled slightly. I donated it to a marine research foundation. It seemed fitting, transforming a symbol of private privilege into a space for public good. No regrets about giving up your sanctuary? None, he said without hesitation. It represented everything I needed to leave behind. Isolation, control, the illusion of perfect security. Sienna studied him in the soft evening light, seeing clearly the transformation that had occurred gradually over their 2 years of careful reconnection. Not just in his words or his professional choices, but in his fundamental presence, the way he occupied space without needing to dominate it, the way he listened without calculating responses, the way he had learned to exist without controlling outcomes. What? Adrian asked, noticing her thoughtful gaze. I was just thinking about how far we've come, Sienna replied. From federal subpoenas and camera crews to cooking dinner together. A journey I never expected, but am grateful for every day, Adrian said quietly. As the evening ended, he made no attempt to extend it beyond its natural conclusion. At the door, they embraced briefly. A friendly hug, nothing more, yet containing the warmth of genuine connection. Thank you for dinner, Adrian said. Thank you for coming, Sienna replied. Then, after a moment's consideration, I'm glad we found our way here, whatever here is. So am I, Adrian agreed. Good night, Sienna. Good night, Adrian. After he left, Sienna stood at her window, watching as he walked to his car. Not with the aching longing of unresolved romance, but with the quiet appreciation of witnessing something rare. A person who had truly changed in fundamental ways, who had done the difficult work of transformation not for external reward but from genuine conviction. Over the following months, their connection continued to deepen gradually. Dinners became more frequent. Professional collaboration expanded into genuine friendship. The careful boundaries they had maintained began to soften naturally, without pressure from either side. 3 years after the island confrontation, they found themselves walking along a beach at sunset. Not Adrian's private island, but a public shoreline near a conference where both had been speaking. The symmetry with the final scene of Sienna's documentary wasn't lost on either of them. Life imitating art, Adrian commented with a small smile. Or art anticipating life, Sienna replied. They walked in comfortable silence, the waves washing gently against the shore. So much had changed since that day when Sienna had arrived with a camera crew and a federal subpoena. Adrian's accountability initiative had become a model for corporate oversight. Sienna's documentaries had established her as one of the most respected voices in ethical journalism. Their professional lives had flourished in parallel, occasionally intersecting but never becoming dependent on each other. I've been offered a teaching position, Adrian said suddenly. Ethics and leadership at Stanford. A complete career change. Are you going to take it? Sienna asked. I'm considering it, he replied, using my experience, both successes and failures, to help shape the next generation of leaders. Feels right. Sienna nodded, understanding his attraction to the role. You'd be good at it. You've lived both sides of the ethical equation. What about you? Adrian asked. What's next after the international tour? I've been thinking about a different kind of project, Sienna said. Something more personal. About relationships and power dynamics. How love and control become tangled. Adrian glanced at her, understanding the subject's significance. Sounds important. And challenging. It would be, she acknowledged. Especially because I'd need to examine my own patterns, not just others. They reached a rocky outcropping and stopped, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The moment felt weighted with unspoken possibilities. Sienna, Adrian said finally, his voice quiet but clear. I need to ask you something. She turned to face him fully. Okay. These past 3 years, rebuilding trust, finding this new connection between us. It's been one of the most meaningful journeys of my life, he began. But I've been careful not to presume, not to push for more than friendship, not to assume that redemption means entitlement to a second chance romantically. Sienna nodded, appreciating his awareness of these boundaries. I need to know, Adrian continued, if friendship is all you want from me, because if it is, I will honor that completely and gratefully. What we've rebuilt is precious to me, regardless of its form. The question hung between them, honest, vulnerable, without pressure or expectation. So different from the Adrian who had once tried to manage every outcome, control every variable. I don't know, Sienna answered truthfully. For a long time, friendship was all I could imagine between us. The hurt went too deep for anything else. Adrian nodded, accepting her honesty without defensiveness. But lately, she continued, I found myself wondering what might be possible. Not a return to what we were. That relationship was fundamentally flawed. But something new, built on who we've become since. Hope flickered in Adrian's eyes, carefully tempered with patience. I've wondered the same thing, he admitted. But I promised myself I wouldn't rush you, wouldn't try to control the outcome. I've noticed, Sienna said with a small smile. It's one of the changes I trust most. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Neither spoke for a moment, allowing the weight of the conversation to settle between them. So where does that leave us? Adrian asked finally. Sienna considered the question carefully. Open to possibilities, she said. Moving forward slowly, intentionally. Seeing what might grow naturally between who we are now, not who we were then. I can work with that, Adrian said, a genuine smile warming his features. As the last light faded from the sky, they turned to walk back along the beach. No dramatic declarations, no passionate embrace. Just two people who had traveled through betrayal, accountability, and healing to arrive at a place of authentic possibility. Adrian reached for her hand tentatively. Sienna took it, their fingers intertwining naturally. A small gesture, but significant in its simplicity, connection without possession, intimacy without control. Whatever happens between us, Sienna said quietly, I'm grateful for the journey that brought us here. So am I, Adrian replied. Every difficult step of it. They walked back along the shoreline hand in hand, their future unwritten but full of possibility. Not despite their complicated past, but because of how it had transformed them both. The story that had begun with a confrontation on a private island had no neat conclusion, no definitive ending. Just two people continuing to grow, to learn, to build something neither could have imagined when a helicopter landed on that beach 3 years earlier. Perhaps that was the most powerful truth of all. That real change isn't a destination but an ongoing journey, and that sometimes the people who challenge us most profoundly are the ones who help us become our better selves. As night fell completely, they reached the end of the beach, their path forward illuminated not by certainty but by the quiet light of earned trust and authentic connection. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. As seasons changed, their relationship evolved with deliberate care. Neither rushed toward definitions or declarations. Instead, they allowed each step to emerge organically from genuine connection rather than expectation. Adrian accepted the teaching position at Stanford, relocating to the Bay Area where Sienna had established her production company years earlier. The geographical proximity removed the logistical barriers that had limited their time together, yet they maintained their separate lives, his teaching and research, her filmmaking and advocacy. "It's strange," Adrian remarked one evening as they walked through a farmer's market near his new apartment. "In our previous relationship, I would have been pushing for you to move in by now, trying to secure what we had." Sienna selected a basket of strawberries, considering his observation. "And now I understand that real security comes from freedom, not containment," he replied. "I'm happy with whatever this becomes, as long as it's authentic." She smiled, recognizing the profound shift in his approach to relationships. That's exactly why this works. Their romance, if that was even the right word for what was growing between them, developed with a maturity neither had possessed in their first connection. They discussed boundaries openly. They respected each other's independence fiercely. They built something intentional rather than assumed. 6 months after Adrian's move to the Bay Area, Sienna began work on the personal project she had mentioned, a documentary exploring the intersection of love, power, and control in intimate relationships. The subject required her to examine her own patterns and experiences, including her history with Adrian. "I want to interview you for this," she told him over dinner at his apartment. "But it's complicated. We're in a different place now, and I don't want to reopen old wounds unnecessarily." Adrian considered her request thoughtfully. "If it serves the project, I'm willing. But maybe we should establish some parameters, questions that are off-limits, a way to pause if it becomes too difficult." "That's remarkably healthy," Sienna observed with a small smile. "I've had good teachers," Adrian replied, "including my own failures." The interview took place in a neutral studio space, with Sienna's full crew present. They had agreed that maintaining professional boundaries during the process would protect both the integrity of the project and their evolving relationship. On camera, Adrian spoke with unflinching honesty about his past behavior, his need for control, his fear of vulnerability, his confusion of protection with possession. "I believed I was acting from love," he explained, "but real love doesn't seek to diminish the other person's agency. It wasn't until I lost everything that I began to understand the difference." "And now," Sienna asked from behind the camera, "how do you approach relationships differently?" Adrian's gaze was steady, thoughtful. "I've learned that true connection requires complete freedom. That trust isn't about certainty but about acceptance of risk. That love isn't ownership but witness, seeing the other person fully and valuing their independence as much as their presence." The interview continued for hours, delving into the psychological underpinnings of control dynamics, the cultural factors that enable them, and the difficult path toward healthier patterns. Throughout, they maintained their professional roles, filmmaker and subject, despite the personal significance of the conversation. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, the crew packed up and left, leaving Sienna and Adrian alone in the studio. "That was harder than I expected," Sienna admitted, her professional composure softening. "For me too," Adrian acknowledged. "Articulating those patterns makes me acutely aware of how easily I could slip back into them." "But you haven't," Sienna said quietly. "That's what matters." They left the studio separately that evening, a deliberate choice to maintain the boundary between their professional collaboration and personal connection. The next day, they met for a hike in the hills overlooking the city, the physical activity helping to process the emotional complexity of the interview. "Thank you for your honesty yesterday," Sienna said as they reached a viewpoint overlooking the bay. "It will make the documentary more powerful." "Thank you for the opportunity," Adrian replied. "It was clarifying for me too." They stood side by side, watching fog roll across the water below. The silence between them was comfortable, reflective. "Do you ever wonder?" Adrian asked finally. "What would have happened if I hadn't interfered with your work back then? If we had stayed together?" Sienna considered the question. "Sometimes, but I don't think we would have lasted. The patterns were too ingrained. We needed to break to become who we are now." Adrian nodded, accepting this truth without defensiveness. "The irony is that by losing you completely, I finally learned how to love without possession. And by confronting you at your most vulnerable, I learned to stand in my power without needing to prove it," Sienna added. They continued their hike, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Yet something had deepened between them through the shared reflection. A mutual recognition of how far they had traveled, both individually and together. As Sienna's documentary progressed through production, their personal relationship continued to evolve with careful intention. They spent holidays together, met each other's families, built traditions that belonged to this new connection rather than echoing their past. On the anniversary of the island confrontation, now 4 years passed, Adrian suggested they return to the beach where they had first discussed possibilities beyond friendship. "A pilgrimage of sorts," he explained, "to honor the journey." They walked along the same shoreline at sunset, the familiar landscape now layered with new memories. "I've been thinking about something," Sienna said as they reached the rocky outcropping where they had once stood at a crossroads. "About time and transformation." "What about them?" Adrian asked. 4 years ago, I arrived on your island with a camera crew and a federal subpoena, convinced I knew exactly who you were," she began. "I was certain of my judgment, certain of your character, certain of our impossibility." Adrian listened attentively, giving her space to continue. "If someone had told me then that we would be here now, not just speaking, not just working together, but building something meaningful between us, I would have called them delusional," Sienna continued. "And yet, here we are." "Here we are," Adrian echoed softly. "It makes me wonder what other certainties I might be wrong about," she said. "What other transformations might be possible that I can't yet imagine." Adrian took her hand gently. "That's the beauty of remaining open to possibility. Reality often exceeds our imagination, sometimes painfully, sometimes wonderfully." As the sun touched the horizon, Sienna turned to face him fully. "I love you," she said simply. "Not despite our history, but because of how we've grown through it. Not with the desperate intensity of before, but with something deeper, steadier." The words hung between them. Not a question, not a demand, just a truth offered without expectation. Adrian's eyes filled with emotion. "I love you too," he replied. "In a way I didn't know was possible before. With respect for your boundaries, admiration for your strength, and gratitude for your willingness to witness my change." They stood together as darkness fell, the declaration settling between them not as a dramatic turning point but as a quiet acknowledgement of what had been growing steadily through their careful rebuilding. "What happens now?" Adrian asked, echoing the question he had posed on this same beach a year earlier. Sienna smiled. "We keep building, one day at a time. No rush, no pressure, no predetermined outcome." "I like that plan," Adrian said, drawing her closer. They sealed their declaration with a kiss, not their first since reconnecting, but perhaps their most significant. A kiss that carried the weight of their history and the promise of their future, both equally honored. 6 months later, Sienna's documentary, The Control Dynamic, premiered to critical acclaim. Unlike her previous work focusing on Adrian's corporate failures, this film examined broader patterns of control in relationships, using their story as just one example among many. The result was both personally vulnerable and universally relevant. A meditation on how love becomes distorted through fear, and how genuine connection requires the courage to release control. Adrian attended the premiere openly as Sienna's partner. Their relationship no longer hidden but not flaunted either. They had found a balance that honored both their professional independence and personal connection. At the reception following the screening, a journalist approached them. "Your relationship has become quite the redemption story," she commented. "From federal subpoenas to red carpet appearances. Do you worry that it sends a message that bad behavior can be forgiven if the person is persistent enough?" The question carried an edge, suggesting their reconciliation somehow undermined accountability. Before Adrian could respond, Sienna answered with characteristic directness. "That would be a profound misreading of our journey," she said. "Redemption isn't about persistence. It's about transformation. It's not earned through time alone, but through genuine change demonstrated consistently through actions, not words. And that change has to be for oneself, not to win someone back," Adrian added. "If I had changed solely to reconcile with Sienna, it wouldn't have been real or lasting." The journalist nodded, noting their responses. "So what would you say to people who might see your story as romantic rather than cautionary?" Sienna and Adrian exchanged glances, a moment of silent communication born from years of careful rebuilding. "I'd say that true romance isn't about dramatic gestures or passionate intensity," Sienna replied. "It's about creating a relationship where both people can be fully themselves, where power is balanced, where independence is valued as much as connection. And I'd add that the most important relationship lesson isn't about finding the right person," Adrian continued, "but about becoming the right person, someone capable of loving without needing to control, of connecting without needing to possess." Later that evening, as they walked home from the premiere, Adrian asked the question that had been forming in his mind for months. "Would you consider building a home together? Not because we need to or should, but because I'd like to create a space that belongs to who we are now, not who we were before." Sienna didn't answer immediately, giving the question the consideration it deserved. "I'd like that," she said finally. "But with one condition." "What's that?" "That we design it together. Equal input, equal ownership, equal voice in every decision." Adrian smiled, understanding the significance of her condition. "I wouldn't want it any other way." They began searching for property. Not in the exclusive neighborhoods where Adrian had once lived, nor in the artistic district where Sienna had established herself, but somewhere new to both of them. They eventually found a modest house overlooking the ocean, with enough space for her film equipment and his research materials, for solitude when needed and togetherness when desired. The process of renovation became a metaphor for their relationship, careful, intentional, balancing individual preferences with shared vision. They made decisions collaboratively, each listening to the other's perspective without attempting to dominate. On the day they finally moved in together, 5 years after the island confrontation, Adrian presented Sienna with a small, wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Just a housewarming gift," he replied. "Open it." Inside was a simple silver key on a handcrafted leather keychain. Not the key to their new home, which she already possessed, but something else. "It's symbolic," Adrian explained as she examined it. "A reminder that true love is about opening doors, not building walls. About creating access, not restriction." Sienna smiled, understanding the deeper meaning behind the gesture. "It's perfect," she said, kissing him softly. That evening, as they sat on their deck watching the sunset over the ocean, Sienna reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "If you could go back and change anything," she asked, "would you?" Adrian considered the question carefully. "Not a single moment," he said finally. "Even the painful ones, especially those. They were necessary for both of us." "Even the federal subpoena?" Sienna teased gently. "Especially that." Adrian laughed. "Best thing that ever happened to me, remember?" They fell into comfortable silence, the sound of waves providing a gentle soundtrack to their thoughts. "We should probably thank that camera crew someday," Sienna mused. For documenting the beginning of whatever this has become. A second chance we never expected, Adrian suggested. A first chance at something entirely new, Sienna corrected. As darkness fell, they remained on the deck, talking quietly about their plans, their projects, their shared future. Not with the desperate intensity of their first connection, but with the steady warmth of something built to last. A relationship founded on respect rather than passion alone, on freedom rather than possession, on truth rather than image. The journey that had begun with confrontation had led them here, not to a perfect ending, but to an authentic beginning. A story not of dramatic redemption but of quiet, consistent growth. A love not reclaimed but entirely reimagined. And perhaps that was the most powerful lesson of all. That sometimes the most meaningful connections emerge not from perfect compatibility but from the willingness to grow through conflict, to learn from failure, to rebuild with wisdom earned through pain. As stars appeared above the ocean, Adrian and Sienna sat together in the home they had created. Two people who had seen the worst in each other and chosen to build toward the best. Not despite their history, but because of how it had transformed them both. The end of one story, the beginning of another, and the beautiful, ongoing journey of becoming. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more narratives that remind us of what truly matters in this world. And remember, it's never too late for a second chance. Never too late to make things right. Never too late to discover what real wealth means in your own life.